What we have in today's episode is a story that could really make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Imagine this, you're in your late 20s, you've just been married, you're looking forward to the prime of your life, really, and you start experimenting with magic mushrooms. You do a few microdoses, and then one day you decide that you're going to do a full dose. It's recreational, you just want to see what it's like. You've known other people have done it in the past. You take the drug, first half of the experience is okay, but then quickly things get kind of dark. You start having some paranoia, and for the rest of the week, you just don't really feel quite like yourself. A week passes, and then you smoke some cannabis, and you do it from a vape pen. It's something that you've done in the past, you've tolerated it before, but all of a sudden, you become incredibly unwell. You end up in the emergency room, you get shipped to a psychiatric hospital against your will, where you're essentially coerced into taking a long-acting injectable antipsychotic. Mind you, you've never had a psychiatric diagnosis in the past or any problems. All of this is happening in the context of a drug-induced psychosis or mania. And you leave, and you think that things are going to get back on track, but that's not quite how they work out. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Hi, I'm Dr. Witt-Doerring. I'm here with Jess today. Jess has kindly agreed to come on and share her story with Abilify. Jess, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your day to share your story with us.
Thank you, Josef. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you having me on.
So, Jess, I'd like us to start at the beginning. What was going on in your life when you started taking psychiatric medication? Walk us all the way back to the beginning. How did this all begin for you?
So it's kind of a long story. It started last March 2023. I had started smoking marijuana, and I had smoked for about a year. And during the time I smoked, it was fine. I never noticed any severe reactions to smoking. Just sometimes I would become like slightly paranoid, but it was never like severe or mild anxiety. And then I also started microdosing mushrooms, psilocybin. So that was last March when I first started microdosing psilocybin. And the first few times I used it, I had a good experience with it. And I thought, this is helping me with motivation and helping with my anxiety. And I had good effects from it. And I learned a lot about it. And I knew a lot of people who saw like benefits from it. And then I did a macro dose, like a bigger dose of the psilocybin. And after that trip, that's when things started to change for me. Within that week period of having the macro dose, I started having paranoid thoughts. I started having delusions, and I started becoming more like agitated and arguing with my husband, coworkers, just not acting myself whatsoever. In hindsight, I did not really realize what was going on. I didn't realize, this is because of the mushrooms. This is why I'm having this reaction. I did realize I'm agitated, but I didn't really understand what is going on. I became paranoid sorry.
I was going to say, when you were using the mushrooms, is this kind of recreational use? Was this to help with inspiration, or were you using it for help with depression and anxiety? What was the context that you were going into that, the macro dose, the larger dose of the psilocybin?
Mostly recreational, just for fun. And I was painting, and it sounds silly. I'm 28, I was 27. I never have done drugs in my life. I was always very responsible. So I kind of just wanted to experiment. And I had friends who've done it. So I was interested in just trying to see, mostly just for pleasure or fun.
Actually, tell me this. How was the trip? Was it because I know things went off the rails afterwards, but what was the actual trip like?
So the trip initially wasn't too bad in the beginning, but then it became overwhelming, and I didn't really like what was going on. And it was in the evening, so I wanted to just kind of go to bed and not experience it when it was happening. But half of it, I enjoyed it. I had plants in my house, I was painting, and I had music, and that was nice. But then towards the end, I didn't really enjoy it. I was kind of seeing shadow figures, and it became a little over bearing, my perspective, my visual was changing a little bit, and I didn't like it. But half of it was good, and I did enjoy microdosing.
Okay. Yeah. So walk us forward from there. You come out of this trip and things aren't quite right. Tell us about what happens next.
Yes. So after the macrodose that following week, I thought, people were hacking my phone. I thought people were following me, and I started saying strange things to my husband and other loved ones, and everyone was like, what's going on? It was just completely out of character for me. And then I think it was 10 days after I had smoked marijuana, a new pen that I had bought, just almost like a vape pen with THC. And once I smoked the pen, it put me into psychosis. So it started off as a bad trip, and I was actually with my sister at the time. And I only remember parts of it, but when I was having the bad trip, I remember being very scared and like uncomfortable. I remember telling her like, oh, I'm not enjoying this. Like, I'm having a bad trip. And then parts of it, I don't remember, but some of the parts I do remember, I told her that I was scared and I didn't want to hurt myself. And she was concerned and didn't know what to do. So she called the ambulance and they brought me to the ER.
How much marijuana had you used before this one time where, you had this bad trip? Like, how familiar were you with it personally and all of that?
So I would smoke like a few times a week, like not that much. And I would do it mostly like socially, but I wasn't that experienced with it, to be honest. I wasn't.
Yeah. Okay.
I would do it more like socially with friends or just like a half a blunt or something, but I didn't smoke like a lot.
Do you feel like, I guess, whatever happened after the psilocybin had made you more susceptible to having this bad reaction, or do you think it was chance? How do you look at it looking back now?
Yeah, I personally believe that the psilocybin had some kind of effect from the larger dose leading up to the THC pen that I was smoking. Prior to this, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. Like, I barely even used to drink, and I've never had any like psychiatric diagnosis or illness or anything. I've never been depressed, never had anxiety, like severe anxiety at least.
Walk us forward from there. It sounds like you end up in an emergency room. How do things unfold from then on?
Yeah, so what I do remember being in the emergency room, obviously, like, everyone was very concerned. My husband came, my other siblings came, and I only remember parts of it because I was also medicated there, and I personally don't remember what they gave me. I do remember arguing with the nurse and saying, like, what are you giving me? Because prior to this, I've never been on medication. I've never liked, pharmaceutical companies. I've never even taken, like, besides, like, antibiotics. Like, I've never even taken anything, outside of that, really. So being in the hospital, I remember them telling me, they're worried about me, you're not doing well. And I didn't really understand like what was happening. I knew I had a bad trip from smoking, but I didn't really understand like, oh, I had psychosis. Like, what happened? So my family had to leave because the visiting hours were over, and the medication they gave me made me sleep. So I remember sleeping, and I remember waking up to it being very bright. And I was telling them, like, my eyes hurt, like, it's too bright. I had a very bad headache. And I asked for something to, like, close my eyes. And they were telling me that we're transferring you to another hospital. And I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know what was going on. But later I found out it was, like, 3 or 4 in the morning. And they had notified my husband and my sister that they were transferring me to a psychiatric hospital. But when I was coming out of sleep, I was very, like, delusional. And I wasn't really like understanding what was happening. All I heard them say was, we're transferring you to another hospital. So I just said, okay, like I'm on a stretcher at this point. And they brought me over in an ambulance to the psychiatric hospital. And when I got there, it was raining. I had the paramedics like kind of like walk me through into the building. And when they shut the door, I felt like personally when I came into the building, I felt like I spawned in like a post-apocalyptic like video game. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of like Modern Warfare or like, I forget what it's called. But anyway, I felt like I just spawned into a video game. Like I felt so detached of like what was going on in my environment. and it was very outdated and old, and there wasn't anyone around. And there was, like old TVs, old furniture. And I'm like looking around, like trying to figure out like, where am I? What's going on? It didn't look like a regular hospital. So in my head, I think, I'm at a hospital, but I'm like, where's all the doctors and nurses, and where's like, this does not look like a hospital. And, eventually someone came and like got me and transferred me to a different area where, I met with a nurse, and they kind of went over a little bit what was going on, but I barely remember it. They ended up giving me more medication. And for the first 4 or 5 days, I was in and out of psychosis, and they heavily medicated me. So I personally don't remember the whole thing. I was like in and out of consciousness. And some of the times I do remember, I remember being held down and like telling them I didn't want the medication. And like when I left the hospital, I had bruises and like Band-Aids all over my arm. I was there for 7 days. And the 4 or 5 days I was there, once I started to become like more coherent, and I realized like, okay, like where am I? Like what's going on? And the way, these hospitals are set up, it's very difficult to use the phone, especially if you're not like in your right mind. If you're blacking out and you're in psychosis, it's difficult to use the phone. So I did speak to my family a little bit, but it was hard for me to use the phone to like communicate to them, like I want to leave and like what's going on. And like the doctors were communicating to them, like my situation, like my progress, but they were very unprofessional with a lot of the way they handle things. Like my family had a really hard time like contacting them and trying to figure out like what to do.
So walk us forward from here to, because I know you end up having a bad reaction to Abilify. What happens between then and when you have this reaction?
Yes. So I ended up going home after this hospital stay for a week, and I had taken some of the oral tablets they had given me. I think it was Risperidone. I forget. It might have been Geodone or Risperidone. I don't remember. And I was still at this point, I was still very, manic, and I was paranoid still slightly. And I personally think the combination of the medications they gave me, like increased it and made it worse, because I also stopped taking it abruptly. And no one really informed me about like side effects or withdrawals. And like looking back, I did have like akathesia slightly as well, or like internal like terror. And I didn't know what was really going on, and I wasn't sleeping. And I ended up going to another facility that was a lot nicer and like privately owned. And my family was very concerned at this point, and they didn't know what to do. So when I went to this facility, as soon as I walked in, it was like co-ed, and it was mostly men that were there. And the first hospital, I had a really bad experience, and like I saw like some really inappropriate triggering things from men at the first hospital, and it really like messed me up. So when I got to this other hospital, there was a lot of men there as well that were saying inappropriate things to me, and it really triggered me. I think it kind of set something off from like the previous hospital. So I was there, I got there, and I was settling in, and I was trying to figure out, their schedule, their routine. They kind of went over orientation and everything, and like went over like what they're going to be going through like during my stay. And I was very uncomfortable as soon as I got there. And I started getting like PTSD from the other hospital, and I started almost panicking, and I was telling them, I don't want to be here. I'm really scared. I'm feeling uncomfortable, and I couldn't sleep. And I was telling them, can you call my husband? I want to leave. And they just kept saying like, no, you have to wait like, the 72 hours. And I was there at this point, like volunteer, like I went there on my own willingly. And they wouldn't call my husband. They wouldn't like let me call anybody. And I went through the whole night, like basically begging them, like, I want to leave. Like, I don't want to be here. So I got to the point where it was morning, and I left. Like the facility of that place wasn't like, you weren't like locked in or anything. So I left, and I walked to a neighbor's house, and I had them call my husband, and I had him come and get me. But I essentially like, ran away from the hospital because I was so like traumatized and scared. And at this point, of course, my family was like, what is going on? Like, what is happening? Like, why did you leave? And I was panicking and telling them how scared I was. And I was saying, like, you know, they're going to try to medicate me, and telling them I was scared being around the men that were in the facility. And my husband and my sister were trying to figure out like what to do with me at this point, because I was in such a panic state and I was afraid of like everything at this point. Like they couldn't like calm me down. So they brought me to another emergency room. And from that emergency room, I stayed there for about 24 hours, and I calmed down. I slept. They didn't give me any medication, but they just fed me and monitored me. And they transferred me from there to another psychiatric hospital. And at this point, it was kind of whatever hospital was available, like whatever bed was open. You know, I didn't really have a choice of like where I was going. So I was brought on in an ambulance to this hospital. And as soon as I got to that hospital, it started all over again. Like walking in, no one's really telling me what's going on. And I waited 6 hours in like essentially like a prison cell before they transferred me to the main area, like where I'll be held. And they were very horrible at communicating. Like they didn't really thoroughly tell me like what's going on, where, you know, what they're going to do to help me. And at this point too, I went on my own. Like I volunteered to go there as well. My family was very concerned, and they told me, you know, we need to make sure that you're okay. And at this point, the first hospital had said to me and my family that I may have bipolar because of what I was showing from the drug-induced psychosis. This is what they told my family. So my family was like, does she have this illness? Does she need help? Does she need to be medicated? So they thought it was the best option to hospitalize me. Being at this third hospital, waiting in that room for 7 hours, they finally transferred me to the main area. And again, it was co-ed. And immediately I was uncomfortable being in this space again. And no one spoke to me. I just kind of found a seat somewhere and like tried to occupy my mind. And I spoke with a few people that were there already, and I asked them kind of like what's going on, like what has been happening. And they all said the same thing, like everything's slow process. We waited hours as well. We're still waiting. Eventually a nurse called me, I think after an hour and a half. And she just went over basically discussing like medication a little bit and where I'll be, like she gave me like toiletry items and like where I'll be sleeping. They kind of just designated me to a room, and I had a roommate. The first 3 or 4 days I was there, it's just like a horrible experience. They, you know, treat you like second-class citizens, or like worse than dogs at an animal shelter. Like they don't, at least my personal experience at this hospital in particular, I don't want to speak on all behalf of psychiatric hospitals, but this one in particular was just horrible. Like watching the way they treated other patients that were even more of a severe situation than I was in. You know, people that can barely feed themselves or having a hard time, like, you know, with their medication or sitting still. They just, you know, yell at people, throw things around. Like, there was one point, I think it was the third night I was there. I woke up in the middle of the night because a man tried to go in my room, like another patient. And they barely like addressed that. They kind of acted like it wasn't a big deal. And then I couldn't sleep after that, and I wanted water, and we weren't allowed to have water in our room. So I went to the main area to get water, and they had told me to not, like I was not allowed outside of my room. And I was basically telling them, you know, I just wanted water. And the nurses got upset with me and put me in an isolation room.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And they threatened to lock me in there if I got out again. And they, I was scared and very upset. And I told them, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why I'm in this room? Like, what did I do? I just wanted water. and they told me, you're not allowed after curfew and I told them that, like, what am I supposed to do if I want something to drink? Like, this doesn't make sense. And I have no idea how these hospitals work. Like, prior to this, I barely even have gone to a regular hospital in my life. And I didn't think it was like a big deal to ask like for water. And after that, they injected me with Benadryl to make me fall asleep.
Walk us forward to the events that lead to you on the Aristata injection.
Yes. So I was there in total 10 days. And out of the 10 days I was there, 7 of the days I did not take medication. I refused to because of the bad experience I had at the other hospitals. And the only thing I was taking was potassium and iron. Those are the only things I agreed to take. And every day they would pester me to take other medications. And at this point, I had only spoke with the psychiatrist twice, in total 15 minutes. And the 2 times I spoke to him, he never really thoroughly went over anything about treatment options or what bipolar is. And I know he spoke to my family members, my husband, so they kind of filled him in on my behavior and like what I was experiencing after this drug-induced situation. And during the whole duration I was there, I attended all of the therapy groups. I was coherent. I filled out all the paperwork. I did everything I was like supposed to do. And most of the time I was just reading or just trying to kill time because, you don't have your phone. There's no way to really pass the time. And you're in a room with a bunch of people who are not doing well. So it's not like a pleasant environment. And on the 7th day, I was very upset that I was still there because the 3 or 4 days prior, I had filled out a certain document that I needed to fill out to leave. And the discharge manager was supposed to work with the psychiatrist to get me out sooner. And they messed up my paperwork. So I was there a lot longer. And I was extremely frustrated, like telling them, like, I don't want to be here anymore. This doesn't make sense why I'm still here this long. And they had told me that they wanted to monitor me longer and make sure that I was okay. And they mentioned again taking medication. And at this point, they kind of indicated that if I did not take medication, I would be there longer.
Wow.
And my husband was also concerned, and he had mentioned, just maybe if you just try it again, like if it'll help you get out. So I was very like pressured in every situation of like taking medication. And at this point, I was so scared and desperate to get out. I just agreed to take medication. So I took what they prescribed me, and they gave me 15 milligrams of Abilify.
Were you still having psychosis at the time?
No.
No.
I had psychosis 4 or 5 days when it first happened. And at this point, that was 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago when I was at the hospital at this point.
So why were you there? Like what was the behavior that warranted involuntary hospitalization?
Because I was still paranoid and manic.
Okay.
I was showing signs of being manic.
Okay. And so what was the nature of your paranoia back then? Did it have any themes when you were hospitalized?
I thought people were following me, like my phone was hacked. And I just became very aggressive, and I was like, I didn't hurt anybody and I didn't try to hurt anybody. I mean, try to like fight with anybody, but I was like verbally saying like mean things to my family. I was like saying things like didn't make sense. Like I was getting upset for no reason, like acting out of character. This was not something I normally do or act like. Okay.
So you're there, and I guess there's still some paranoia and some mania going on, and then it sounds like they pressure you to take Abilify. Is that right?
Yes. So the 7 days I was there without medication, I was returning to baseline. I was still like in a heightened state because I was scared and traumatized, and I was still like slightly paranoid, but I wasn't having like like even in my notes, like from this day, like there was nothing on regards of like my behavior acting to the point where I wasn't like climbing walls or like trying to hurt anybody or acting any way that they would think like, oh, we need to, inject her. I agreed to take the Abilify pills. I took 15 milligrams, and immediately within like 20 minutes, I was falling asleep during the therapy session. I had vision issues. I was having a hard time walking. I became very like sedated, and I had told the nurse this, and the nurse was very like dismissive and just said, oh, sometimes that happens. Like, don't worry about it. Like, eventually you'll get better. Or like it'll just pass. So I ended up taking it for 2 more days, the Abilify pills, the 15 milligrams. And on the day of discharge, they had indicated for me to take the injection. And I immediately thought, like, that's strange. Like, why would I take an injection? And they were saying, like, oh, it has fewer side effects. This will be better, for medication management. And at this point, no one even used the word antipsychotics. Like, I had no way to Google medication. I had no idea, like, what I was even taking when I was taking the pills. I don't know what I thought I was taking. I thought maybe I was taking, like, a mood stabilizer or something. And I was extremely vulnerable and desperate. And I did tell them I did not want to take it when they offered the injection. I was very scared. I was actually physically in a corner when the nurses were telling me that, the doctor wanted me to take this injection. And then the doctor comes around and he spoke to me for 5 minutes in a hallway about this injection. And I remember telling him, I don't really feel comfortable taking this. Is it safe? And he said, oh, of course it's safe. And I said, what are the side effects? And he said, drowsiness and weight gain. And I was very hesitant. And I told him, I really don't feel comfortable taking it. And he assured me that it'd be better option to take than the pills, especially because the first hospital I was throwing up the pills. They were making me sick. Mm-hmm. So he thought, oh, let's inject her instead. She can't throw that up.
Okay. Did you start with a monthly injection or did you go straight to the 2 monthly?
They went straight into the 2 monthly.
How many days had you taken the tablets for before they gave you the monthly injection?
3.
3. Okay. So walk us forward from there. What happened after you received the injection?
Yes. So I received the injection last year, April 17th, and then they released me. And within a 3 to 4 week period, my life completely changed.
Talk me through how things started to unravel from, the first change that you noticed, things kind of snowballing, building up. Tell us right from the beginning, the first moment that you knew that something wasn't quite right.
Yes. So in hindsight, looking back, there was many moments where things were slowly, like gradually changing, but I didn't really realize that it was connected to the medication. I started losing interest in a lot of things I enjoyed. I became very quiet and I was very disinterested in things that I used to enjoy doing with my friends, like socializing. And I started working again part-time. And I used to love my job. And working, I became very disinterested and tired, and I was confused with certain tasks I was doing, and I was not engaged at all whatsoever. But at the time, I wasn't aware that it was the medication, and it was very gradual. But there was a moment, like I had this like epiphany moment where it was the end of May, June. I went to the beach with my husband, and we rode our bikes, we had lunch, and we did things that we normally love doing together. And I remember thinking the whole day was just so challenging. Like it was like a chore. And I remember sitting with him, we were eating lunch, and I just like was looking around and I was staring at him and I was like, I can't feel anything. And he was like, what are you talking about? I said, have you noticed, like, I don't really laugh anymore? And he was like, what do you, like, you sure you laugh sometimes? And I was like, no, like, I really don't. And he's like, well, yeah, I guess you've been kind of quiet. And I told him, I said, I really, like, I can't describe what I'm experiencing right now, but I literally can't feel anything. And that's when I really started to realize, like, something's really wrong.
Before we go further with the story, when did the mania and the paranoia disappear for you? How long after you started Abilify or left the hospital, when did that fizzle out?
It stopped, I want to say, within the week of leaving the hospital.
Okay.
I was pretty much back to, like, my schedule in my life after that.
Okay, so you have this moment at the beach where you realize that you're really numb, not feeling anything, super disconnected. How did things evolve from there?
I was extremely concerned, and at this point, I didn't know what was going on. And one of my first thoughts was, oh, it has to be the medication. And my cognition at this point was so bad. Like, I was having horrible memory issues. And I'm not sure if you've heard this in the community or if anyone speak about this, but they call it, like, blank mind. There's like an actual name for it. I forget what it is. It's like aphantasia, or I think that's what it's called. But I have a really hard time, like, visualizing things in my head in a flow of thoughts. I used to have, like, spontaneous thoughts and a flow of thoughts, and that's very difficult for me to have now. It's almost like non-existent. And once that started to happen, it was just, I couldn't work anymore. I stopped working, and I wasn't sleeping. I had severe insomnia. I would sleep like 1 or 2 hours a night, and I couldn't retain information like I used to. Like, I would read something or research something and look something up, and I was not, like, remembering anything. I used to read all the time and listen to podcasts all the time, and I could, like, recite things I heard or read, and I could not do that anymore. And I was very concerned. I was like, I felt like I had dementia or something. And I wasn't enjoying anything at all whatsoever. Like, I would drink my coffee and I wouldn't even feel effects from caffeine. And it just, all these things kept coming up that I was so concerned. I didn't think it was humanly possible to feel this way. And I just kept telling my husband and my family, like, something's wrong. Like, none of this makes sense. And I had another follow-up with the psychiatrist that I had worked with in the hospital who gave me this injection. And I had told him, I said, something's wrong. Like, I don't feel well at all. I said, I can't feel anything. Like, I feel numb. I have sexual dysfunction. I'm not sleeping. I don't have an appetite. I can't enjoy anything. I can't work. I'm not working anymore. I don't feel love. I don't feel happiness. I haven't laughed. I can't enjoy music. And I'm telling him all these things. And he says, that sounds like your bipolar depression. And I said, I don't really feel like I'm depressed. I'm still, like, trying to do things. I've never really been depressed in my life. And I've known people who've been depressed, but I literally can't feel anything. And he said, no, it just sounds like your depression. And I said, I think it's the medication. And he said, no, I don't think it's the medication. And I said, okay, well, what's going to happen? Like, what am I supposed to do? And I said, how long am I even supposed to take this medication? He said, like, potentially years, the rest of your life, essentially. And at this point, I was never given a proper diagnosis. Like, on all of my paperwork, there was no diagnosis. I was never given a diagnosis. And I also found out that Aristata is not even FDA approved for bipolar. It's for schizophrenia. And I was never even diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I didn't realize all this till later. So he recommends Lexapro. He said, this happens. It's common. You should just take an antidepressant. And I was extremely hesitant. And I was like, is that going to help? Like, this is okay. Like, and I agreed to take the Lexapro. And then he said, soon you're going to have to get another injection. Like, your time is coming to get another injection. And at this point, I was like, there's no way I'm doing that again. And I told him that. I expressed my concerns to him, and he said, you can make a decision of what you want to do with pills or the injection, but you should continue to stay on this antipsychotic. And at this point, I was like, is it necessary to be on these medications right now? Like, but at least besides the antidepressant. And he was like, yes, we don't want you to go into psychosis again or have mania again. We want to avoid the hospital at all costs. Because my concern was going back to the hospital. And I told him I want to take the pills. And I asked him, I said, can we lower it? 15 milligrams seems like a lot. And he said, no. So I ended up taking 15 milligrams of Abilify and then 10 milligrams of Lexapro for 2 months after the injection. It was like a month and a half, I think. Mm-hmm. In total, I was on medication for like 3.5 months.
Walk us forward. What happened now that you transitioned to oral meds?
I started experiencing akathesia. At the time, I didn't even know what that was. I just started pacing in my house for 8 hours a day. I just remember being in my house. It was like a beautiful July. And I'm like looking around in my neighborhood thinking like, what is wrong with me? And I'm just pacing and watching the clock on my oven, thinking like, I've gone mad. Like there's something like, and I had this just internal restlessness. Like I wanted to crawl out of my skin, and it was like anxiety, but it's not anxiety. It's like I don't even know it's undescribable. I can't even describe it. And my husband, was concerned, and he didn't know what was going on. And that lasted for about 2 months, like the whole duration of when I was on these pills. And I could barely sleep. I was essentially losing my mind. And, I had another appointment with this doctor, psychiatrist, and trying to think, there was a point where I was messaging him, telling him my concerns, and then his assistant emailed me back the day before our appointment and said that he needed to cancel the appointment. And at this point, I wanted to get off the medication like ASAP. So he canceled our appointment, and he ended up being out of town for 2 months. And I was desperate to get off the medication, so I had to find a new psychiatrist now at this point. Mm-hmm. So I had to start that process of finding a new doctor, telling him my story, and then he helped me taper off the medication. And at this point, I didn't realize it was a rapid taper, but he tapered me off within like a 2-3 week period.
It's not the worst thing for the Lexapro. After about 2 months, it's still pretty quick though. So what happened after that? So you've got akathesia, you're pacing, you go through this rapid taper. Where did you land after that?
So once I got off the medication, that was last August, and eventually the akathesia went away, and I sleep 3 to 5 hours a night now instead of like 2. But besides that, all of my symptoms have stayed the same.
Can you take a moment just to list your symptoms just in detail? Maybe start with some of the cognitive stuff, and then the emotional symptoms, and then anything physical, maybe in that order. Just describe what it's like for you now.
Yes. So my memory is horrible. I used to work in restaurant management, and I had an excellent memory. My job literally required me to remember many things at once. And I can barely remember short-term and long-term situations. Like somebody told me something, and like within 15, 20 minutes, like I'll most likely forget. And long-term memory, if somebody brings up a story or something that happened in my life, I can't visualize it and I can't remember. Like I have to really think about it, and I can't really remember like in detail like what happened. Like I really don't. And that's happened multiple times with my family, like bringing up memories or something. I don't remember it. And word finding, I have a really hard time finding words in my head. If somebody's trying to tell me a story or communicate something to me, I have a really hard time, like, continuing the conversation. Like, I used to be very witty and chatty, and I was known to speak a lot, and now I'm essentially a mute. All my friends and family members have said that, like, wow, you're so quiet. Like, I've never seen you like this. So it's extremely isolating, and I feel like disconnected. And it's really hard for me to contribute to conversations now because of the word finding and memory issues. I essentially feel like my mind is empty compared to what it used to be. And just retaining information, like reading, like it's really difficult for me. When I was on the Abilify, I could barely read. Like, even to try to research like what was going on was extremely difficult because I couldn't like comprehend and like register and like maneuver through like what I was reading. Like, it was very like foggy and disorganized, and I couldn't really remember, like, register what was going on. And the emotional blunting, the first 4 months, I could not cry. Like, I could not. No matter what, I could not cry. And I also barely had any facial expressions when I was medicated. Like, even my family was saying, like, you look like you had Botox. Essentially, you don't even express yourself at all. Like, you look like you're just, like a mannequin, essentially. So the emotional blunting affected me so poorly, even especially when I was on the medication, that I was not even expressing myself like in any way. And I was basically saying like yes or no answers, and I wouldn't really communicate. And the anhedonia, like the inability to feel any pleasure, has just been completely soul destroying. Not experiencing any emotions and any pleasure from anything I do, no matter what. I've tried everything you can think of. Prior to this, I've gone to talk therapy for years, and I've developed pretty healthy coping skills of what I've learned that used to make me feel happy or cheer me up, or, everything textbook of what they say to do when you're depressed, or nothing works. Like, no matter all the talk therapy I've done, all the activities, exercise, things I used to enjoy, nothing makes me feel good or better, nothing. So for me right now, the emotional blunting and anhedonia is the worst. And I would say second is the cognitive issues. And then I have sexual dysfunction as well. The sensory is off completely. Like, it does not feel the same at all whatsoever, what it used to feel like before. And it's not like enjoyable, and I don't feel like connected to my partner like I used to at all. It's extremely dehumanizing experience. And the insomnia is insane. It's gotten better, but to not sleep for a year and basically sleeping 2-3 hours now to 5 hours is just, it's a form of human torture to like sleep deprive somebody. And just having zero motivation, not having a reward system and not enjoying anything is just, you're dragging, 50,000 pounds on your back, and you're trying to do basic tasks, essentially.
Talk to us about how your life has changed since all of this happened. What is it like in start with your relationship? What impact has this had on your marriage?
It's had a horrible impact. Yeah. It's not okay right now. And just my entire family as well. I haven't seen so many close friends and like relatives. I've missed weddings. I've attempted to attend a few parties and events throughout the year, and it's soul destroying. Like, being in a room surrounded by people you love and care about that you've known for years, and celebrating holidays, and just to be the only person in the room that can't feel connection or anything and not laugh or enjoy what's going on. It's just, I truly feel like my soul has been ripped out of my body. Like, I didn't think it was humanly possible to feel this way. And I didn't think this kind of evil even existed in the world. I essentially feel like I had a chemical lobotomy.
I know you mentioned you had to stop working. Did you return to work, or are you okay?
No.
What does a day look like for you now?
It's horrible. I used to be extremely active, and I was known as a busybody, and I literally never sat down. I was always doing something, being active. And now I basically spend most of my time either in bed, on the couch, on my phone, trying to distract myself any way possible. I try to read sometimes, but it's very difficult for me to be engaged into something longer than like a few minutes because I just lose interest or doesn't keep my attention. I can't enjoy TV. I can't enjoy music. I'll still try to listen to it or watch things, but I'm just not interested or engaged at all. And it's even triggering at moments because I can't relate to it at all anymore. And I don't feel connected to it. Like watching like a romantic comedy or something, and you see this life in front of you, healthy, normal humans, it just makes you feel like it's like just being stabbed in the heart that you can't experience that. I try to go for a walk sometimes. That's even extremely difficult because I also have fatigue. I think partially just because I don't sleep anymore. But I don't have any energy anymore like I used to. And everything I do is just going through the motions. I spend most of my time basically sitting around, just trying to pass the day. And it's extremely difficult.
How has your husband reacted to what has happened to you? You know, from his perspective, what has that been like for him? You know, as you've seen that evolve.
He's very concerned and worried. It has like completely like just traumatized him and like destroyed him. He's also a shell of himself because of what has happened to me. And we just got married as well. Like 5 months into our marriage, this happened to me. So it has been horrible, like on the two of us. And I've spent a lot of my time away from him, not even in my home because of the suicidal ideation that I've been experiencing. And he works, and it's been extremely stressful for him to have that on his shoulders, knowing like he can't watch me 24/7. So I've been staying a lot with like family members who have more time or home more to help like essentially watch me. Because at this point, I don't want to go to a hospital right now. But I have spent like a lot of my time throughout the year with other like various family members, just like essentially so they can watch me.
What has this been like for your parents? Have they been able to understand the diagnosis and what's happened to you? Because I know PSSD, it's not a serotonin drug, but that's exactly what it sounds like you have from what you're describing. Have they been able to understand and accept the diagnosis? What was it like for parents or whoever your closest family member is?
They all are very worried and concerned, and they believe me, which is, a relief to know, like, they don't think I'm just like making up something. And they know who I was before, and they know like who I am, and they know that this is not, me anymore. They are trying their best to like support me in any way they can. But, they're confused. They don't really understand fully, like, to the length of like what I'm experiencing. Nobody can understand, like, if I was healthy and like someone explained this to me, like, you really, unless you experience it, like, you really can't understand like what it's like to not have emotions, like, and to not feel connection. But they're trying their best to, call me, check on me, visit me, spend time with me. But it's just soul destroying. Like, I have nephews and I can't, I play with them and I can't feel love for them, and I can't, laugh or engage in activities like I used to. I feel like a ghost, essentially.
What have you noticed by way of symptom improvement? I know you mentioned that sleep has partially improved, but still is poor. Is there any positive movement in this, or is it just the same, or are some things worsening? What can you tell us about what's happened with your symptoms over time?
From what I've noticed, basically just my cognition a little bit, slightly. Like, personally, I think 6 months ago, I wouldn't even be able to do this. It would be too difficult for me. Just to like articulate myself and like communicate to you, like what to remember, like timelines, and to explain myself. I can read more. I can kind of watch things longer. I can sit through movies sometimes. I enjoy food a little bit more. Before, I had zero appetite. I was not interested in food whatsoever. It's like eating cardboard. Like, there's no like reward or like, oh, this is delicious. Like, there's nothing. Like, I didn't care about food whatsoever. And my family owns a restaurant. Like, I grew up in hospitality. So it's like, just that's soul destroying on its own, just to not, as a human, to not enjoy food. But honestly, just slightly with my cognition, and slightly with enjoying food, and slightly with watching something longer than like 20 minutes. But besides that, nothing, honestly, like to the point where like the emotional blunting, the anhedonia, the sexual dysfunction, motivation, like has not improved at all whatsoever. And it's been a year since my injection.
Have you spoken to the psychiatrist about what happened to you after they recommended, well, actually, I mean, essentially coerced you onto the Abilify? What was that interaction like?
I have not spoken to him since when he prescribed me the Lexapro, because he was out of town that few months, and then I found a new psychiatrist to taper me off. And then I actually got an email recently that he resigned, or he like at least left the hospital he was working at.
The one who put you on the Abilify after only 3 days. Yeah.
And also I've learned, I mean, maybe this is, you can give me your opinion, but I've learned that even, let's say like I have or had bipolar, like it's not a good idea to give someone Lexapro without like a mood stabilizer, or just, I heard that it's not good to give, because you could essentially go into mania. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. It's not a really commonly used drug in bipolar. Jess, I want to ask you this. How long was it between when you used the cannabis to when they put you on the Abilify injection? How many weeks was that? Or days?
So since I was at the other hospital, they just gave me like orally like the risperidone and geodone. But in total, from like the point where I was, when it started from the cannabis, and then I want to say it was like 3 weeks. It was like a 3-week period from the drug-induced situation or drug-induced episode to when I was injected. And this is no prior history of any psychiatric illness or any, like, I've never shown any signs of any of these things. And this is my first time using psychedelics.
What happened to you is, I would say, it's probably the most common thing that would happen to folks, because, most of the time people have a drug-induced psychosis. People think, oh, maybe they'll recover in a couple of days. But if it actually triggers a mania, or which is what happened to you, it sounds like, sometimes that will go on. You can have these drug-induced manias for, 2 weeks, it's really bad. And then, another week where it's still kind of fizzling in the background, and then it kind of burns off and goes up and down. The first person I ever took in my private practice, that happened to him as well. And it's really common to get prescribed antipsychotics. What's unusual about your case is, typically before you load someone up with 2 months of a drug, you wait for them to tolerate it a bit longer than 3 days.
I've learned that as well.
Is are you having a bad reaction? Are you tolerating it okay? Is it helping you? And then, maybe after they've used it for, 2 weeks, a month, something like that, then you would commit them to essentially having it in their body for 2 months. Because the only way you can get it out after they put it in is you get it surgically removed. They cut open your arm or your leg or wherever it is, and they scoop it out of you. They scoop the blob out. So it just seems like a really short period of time to have been on the Abilify before you got the big dose. And I mean, the other thing with the injections is there's the whole idea of dose dumping, where it's like, if someone puts 2 months worth of the drug in you, there's been a concern that sometimes that clot can get disrupted, and in that case, you might actually dump a whole lot of the drug into your system. And if something like that happened as well, I mean, what happened to you can happen at regular doses, but it's always something that, again, these long acting injections, they're not anywhere near as safe as I think people think they are. But
and I know they're fairly new. Like, have you personally worked with them yourself, and have you seen people have these kind of reactions, or have you heard like much about this?
Not this particular one. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people with PSSD from antidepressants.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that it happens with Abilify as well. I'm quite sure it does have some serotonergic activity, but I mean, we don't really know why it's happening, but everything that you're describing just sounds like PSSD to a T. But the other thing is, it shouldn't be that much of a stretch that someone could end up with cognitive and psychiatric kind of enduring symptoms, because that's what the antipsychotics are already known to do. With tardive dyskinesia being the most common version, where people become they have involuntary movements. And sometimes that can happen after only a couple of doses. That's been seen and documented. And I think what's happened to you, unless we lived in this era now where there's more awareness about PSSD, you would just be diagnosed as having bipolar depression or schizoaffective disorder.
Yeah.
And so I suspect there's probably a lot more people just like you out there who, instead of being able to kind of jump off the merry-go-round and realize what's going on, they may have actually just been escalated on more and more medications, and their whole picture sort of really muddied up and, misdiagnosed and such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally have met people like similar stories to mine, like throughout the forums and communities that have opened up to me about their situation, and they have been like polydrugged as well. And they didn't realize like in the beginning, like what was going on. And they just kind of listened to the doctor.
I could see, because what's happened to you, I mean, chemical lobotomy does come to mind as a reasonable description. It's, if you had a broken leg or something like that, anyone would see it, but because it happens in the mind, it happens in how your emotions and how you organize your thoughts. It's really hard to get that recognized as legitimate, but thankfully you did. I mean, there's not a lot to be thankful for in your story, except I think you got the diagnosis. I mean, I'm not your doctor, but from the sounds of things, I think you got the diagnosis right pretty early on. How did you find out? How did you find out what had happened to you? Like, when did you learn the name of what was going on with you? Tell us that story.
So once I was experiencing these like symptoms back in, I think it was June, July. And then especially when I was having the akathesia, I started researching like antipsychotic side effects. And then I found things on YouTube about it. There's this guy named Russell B. He was like polydrugged and was on a bunch of psychiatric medication when he was young. And he was describing a lot of the same symptoms as me. And then I eventually stumbled upon PSSD, but I don't remember exactly where I saw it. It might have been one of your videos, to be honest. Or because I found you and Angie Peacock like pretty early on. And then of course, like right when I started learning all these things, like I realized like how like horrible of a situation like this was for me.
Yeah.
I actually recently just started taking an MAOI, Parnate, to hopefully help my anhedonia. I just started like a few days ago. So
how's it going?
So far, I'm only taking like 10 milligrams, and I know like to reach like a therapeutic dose, you need to take a little bit more, especially with anhedonia. But I haven't noticed much yet. I haven't really seen like a difference. And I also started taking gabapentin for sleeping.
Okay.
Which took me a long time to even like agree to take that, because I've been so scared about taking medication. And like I've heard horror stories of people who have PSSD or didn't know they had it, took some other kind of med. Oh, you'll be helped, take this med, and they just get worse and worse. I know multiple people who got polydrugged, or they tried every medication their doctor recommended, and now they're forced ECT, or they did ECT, they did ketamine treatment, and they're still the same. And it just, it's absolutely terrifying that like these are the only like methods that we have to help these conditions.
That's not really help.
But I mean, like, help, like.
That's, I mean, one of the hardest things about these side effects is I think we grow up in a world where we go, the doctors will be able to help. This is obviously a serious problem. Surely there's a treatment for this and there's a solution. And then when you stumble into it, you just go, oh my God, this is a complete blind spot and I'm on my own. Yeah.
I always say, especially to my family, it's like you're trying to build a rocket ship blind at this point. And honestly, within the community, we all like kind of jokingly, but like speak about how we're all guinea pigs. Like everyone's trying different meds, trying different methods, trying different things. Like, kind of just like this big spider web where everybody's kind of just communicating what they're trying, what they're doing, what's helping. And it's really interesting to see, but it's also like sad because so many people, will try anything and they get worse. And like no one actually really knows what's going on in our bodies. Like we have no idea. It's the most complex thing in the world, like the human mind, human brain. We're talking like thousands of years of evolution, and we're throwing like these man-made drugs at it just to guess what happens to it,
You get it. Yeah. Just, I want to ask, what keeps you going? I know you said that you've struggled with some suicidal thoughts throughout this. How do you find meaning in forging on? Because I do know that I mean, risk of suicide is a big deal with PSSD and all of that. What's that like for you? How do you?
It's extremely, It's I don't know what I can say. I don't want to like trigger audience members, or like I don't want to.
Well, there's the trigger. There's the trigger warning. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's extremely challenging. I essentially live like minute to minute at this point. I cry daily. I can cry now. And I cry daily to my family members and my husband and my sister. And I tell them constantly, like, I'm not going to make it. And then I actually found out today, somebody I know through the community passed away. She was also like injected with an antipsychotic. And she was sick for, a year and a half, essentially. That's the fourth person since I've been in this like world. That's the fourth person that I've known that has passed away from med harm. The main thing that keeps me going is my family, essentially, like what it would do to them.
Yeah.
But there's moments where I just like, I don't know. I don't know how I made it this far because I've had these thoughts since last July.
Yeah.
And like prior to this, I've never in a million years thought of harming myself or ending my life, like ever. I just got married. I was going to start a family with my husband. Like I was essentially on top of the world. And I have personally have known people who've lost their lives to suicide prior to this. just like throughout my life. And I know the effects it has on people, and I know how scary it is. So I never, ever considered that for myself. So experiencing all this, it's almost like I'm in this like nightmare and I can't wake up from it. And the way I've described it to my family, it's like I'm in a glass jar or box and I'm drowning in this box. And I can see life in front of me. My life is in front of me. And my family members, my husband, my sister, my close family members see me drowning and they're trying to get me out. They're telling me, you're going to be okay. We're going to get you out. But they can't. Like, they don't know how. And I'm watching them try to get me out, drowning. And behind them is my life, like, burning to the ground, essentially. And there's nothing they can do about it. And there's nothing I can do about it. And it's just so painful because it's like, is someone going to throw me a life raft? Is someone going to get me out of this, like, glass box that I'm drowning in every day?
Well, that is raw. Were you an artist? Did you mention something about being an artist previously?
I used to like painting just for fun. And I never was like an artist necessarily, like nothing like professionally, but
I feel like I can feel the artist coming through you and the way you describe things.
Thank you. I used to like poetry and like reading, but now I feel like my mind is just like kind of gone now. So it's interesting that it comes out sometimes. Before
we wrap, what do you want to share? What haven't we covered, or what kind of message would you like to share with the audience, and maybe in particular other folks with PSSD that are listening to this interview right now? Because there'll be a couple of them.
I guess to try to keep on to hope, even though it's pretty impossible most days for all of us. Like, I see everywhere in the community, people are just constantly saying like they can't do it or they want to give up. Just spreading more awareness, like becoming comfortable with sharing your story, because I know it's kind of embarrassing, or it's kind of hard to speak about having sexual dysfunction or not having emotions, or, opening up about such a vulnerable thing. But I think it's really important. It's sad to think that we're going to be the first line of this, like, throughout history, but like somebody has to do it. So I hope that more people can become comfortable with sharing their story and showing their face, and not, being afraid to talk about the dangers of these medications. And I hope that it changes throughout like psychiatry, where people have more of a voice, where they're not force medicated. To me, that's just like the most barbaric thing, to force medicate anybody in any situation. You don't see people force medicating cancer patients. Like, it doesn't make sense to just hold someone down and like inject them with something, or order them to take medication, especially if they're not a harm to anyone or themselves. So I'm hoping, psychiatry in general, like psychiatric hospitals, change, because if you even look throughout history, it's never been good.
It's not a good history, Jess. It's not.
It's never been good. Like, that's why when people say, during COVID, mental health has changed drastically, and it's so widely spoken about, but most people don't actually really understand mental health. And I'm starting to realize more that a lot of people's problems are related to a lot of the harm of these drugs. And you're kind of stuck in this like world where you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, seeing these doctors, taking these meds. But then when you say, oh, it makes me sick, they just say, oh, that's your mental illness. And I pray that one day that doesn't continue to happen anymore. That doctors or, these pharmaceutical companies start to recognize or acknowledge, like, of course, these drugs can harm people. Like, food can harm people. Like, is it that wild to think that a drug that alters your mind can have these kind of consequences, It just blows my mind when, I hear all these stories with PSSD victims, and you get gaslit. Every doctor you go to, they tell you, oh, that's not possible. And you're like, how do you know that? Do you actually know it's not possible? And like, you see dozens and dozens of all kinds of doctors, and they just kind of tell you the same thing. That's not possible. that's just psychosomatic. That's in your head. And these are people like, I have a friend who was going to graduate med school, and he took an antidepressant because he was having like mild anxiety, and now he has PTSD and never became a doctor. You know, what are you talking about? Mental illness? Like, or I know people had a bad breakup and they just took an antidepressant for like a, you know, mild situational depression. And now, you know, now they have these you just get diagnosed at DSM-5. Like, they just kind of like go through it and they're like, oh, that sounds like this. Here you go. Here's some more pills. I just hope that changes. I hope it has more of like a holistic approach, and you actually listen to like the person as a human being and don't just dismiss them for the textbook side effects or symptoms of what, you know, this mental illness is.
Well, Jess, you just contributed to that, because I mean, one of the things I love about what we're doing here is you never know when the turning point is going to be, but I think it's people like yourself and the others that contribute on the channel and also for PSSD Network. It's lots of little drops of water, you know, that together make a big river that, you know, changes things. And it's just more people just like yourself talking about it, and the advocacy of, you know, lots of little things happening simultaneously. So I think that was a really nice message. And Jess, thank you for everything. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate all the work you're doing and spreading awareness for this kind of horrible situation that's occurring to everybody.